In the wake of the Lac-Mégantic rail disaster that killed 47 people, Canada's Transportation Safety Board issued a series of recommendations on improving safety. Today, the federal government acted on the recommendations that hadn't already been addressed. Here's a look at new rules for railways. Transport Canada is introducing standardized requirements for handbrakes and so-called physical defenses to keep parked trains from rolling away. It will hire new staff to conduct more audits and improve information sharing with the cities and towns through which oil trains travel. New research will examine the hazardous properties of different kinds of crude oil, and inspections will check the shipments are classified correctly. Certain railways, including smaller short lines, will have to share their training plans with Transport Canada, which will conduct an audit blitz of training practices. Lisa Raitt is the Minister of Transport and announced those changes this morning. Thanks for being with us, Minister.
Thanks, Amanda.
Well, you said something today that suggested that part of the problem in the Lac-Mégantic disaster wasn't that there weren't rules, it's that the rules weren't being followed. And I want to start there. How do we ensure, how can your department ensure that the rules will now be followed?
Two things we can do. We can do rigorous follow-up, and we can do what you announced at the beginning, which is blitzes or unanticipated and unannounced inspections and audits. Also making sure that they have good training in place. I think those are the key things. And I'm grateful for the Transportation Safety Board for their recommendations. They clearly found that the rules were broken in this case. Our job is to create the rules and make sure that they are enforced. And as you can see, the ultimate enforcement is happening right now in Quebec because the police are the ones that have laid charges.
You are adding auditors and, as you say, going to change the way audits happen, blitz audits. How many more bodies will that mean, and what difference might that make?
So we have about 110 inspectors who are also trained on how to do audits. We're going to bring in higher level, more senior auditors that have more experience. There's going to be about 10 of those, somewhere in that range. They're currently going to go out and make sure that we find those kinds of people. It's a different skill set. I mean, if you know the difference between a transportation inspector, they're very much associated with rules and regulations, probably have come from industry. Auditors, by nature, are those who are very much involved with respect to process associated with accounting and auditing. So it's two different things that we're looking for, but together we have a greater safety net.
One of the things identified here is training. What are your concerns about training, and how do we need to see changes put in place to make sure that these kinds of disasters don't happen?
You know, we've got 46,000 kilometers of track in this country, and it was recognized 25 years ago that we can't have an inspector on every piece of track at every moment in time for every railway. So we need to approach this in a bigger way, and that's through safety management systems. Our job is to make sure that there is an understanding in the industry of what SMS is, that they are obliged to do it, and that we follow up when they're not. So training is an integral piece. There has to be a safety culture at all of these railways. CN and CP do it very well, but they're Class 1 rail systems that work throughout North America and are actually noted for their incredible safety culture in both cases on a North American continent wide. But we want the smaller companies to have the same approach to it as well. So if we check on certain things, like have auditors, like identify where we're in higher risk areas, if you're moving crude, for example, we're going to be making sure that we're working with the companies, looking at their safety culture, and training is a big part of it, because you're only as good as your weakest link, and it has to go through the entire company. You
mentioned those two big players. I've heard from them that they feel there's been a slight overreaction on the regulatory side to what happened at Lac-Mégantic. Not that anybody thinks it's anything other than a giant tragedy, but are those big players who, as you say, were conducting themselves fairly well, going to pay a penalty for the bad behavior of others?
Not at all. I mean, the reality is that we want a safe culture, and we hope that people will utilize these two larger companies as the gold standard, and that they have the best practices essentially in the world when it comes to safety. So already they're probably exceeding whatever regulations we put in place today, Amanda. What we're doing right now is focusing on those short rail lines, as the Transportation Safety Board told us to do, and making sure that we have the resources at Transport Canada to deal with the follow-up and the enforcement and the continuous work on this matter. And that's a great recommendation from TSB, and Transport Canada is going to rise to the occasion.
You mentioned the short rail lines. Of the 46,000, is that a big number? Because we do expect, I think you would expect, to see more and more oil shipping by rail, not less and less of it.
Certainly there was a lot more short rail companies in the past, and we've seen very much abandoning of lines across the country as they do good, cost-effective analysis of what's needed and what's not. But we still do have about 23 short line companies still operating, and those are the ones that we're focusing on. Those are the ones that are federally regulated. There's probably some provincially regulated ones out there as well too, but they're an intrinsic part of our whole system. We need those short line rail companies in order to get these goods, dangerous or not, to either their origin and destination or to where they need to be the most. So we need to have them in place, but we need to transport this stuff safely, and that's got to be the first.
You are increasing the level of disclosure about what's inside the rail cars. Do citizens need more information, including the right not to have dangerous materials running through their towns?
Well, that's two separate questions. Let me start with the first piece, which is with safety, you have to balance security as well too. And having manifests in a real-time nature of dangerous goods going through certain areas, as you can probably imagine from what's unfolded here in Ottawa the past couple of weeks, in terms of our higher concern with respect to safety and security, that's not something that's desirable, and it's not something we want in the public. That being said, first responders in municipalities need to know what they're dealing with, and we've helped with that information sharing between rail companies and first responders. On the second piece, you know, that is a bigger question, and that's something that we're always thinking about in terms of ensuring that we have a safe operation in our system.
All right, I want to switch gears, Minister, if you'll allow me. The Fifth Estate is reporting tonight on the National that before General Motors' giant recall in the ignition switch problem that it finally admitted fault for, your department was investigating, and yet for 8 months nothing happened. Can you tell me what happened with that investigation?
So basically that is, my understanding is that is with the Sûreté de Québec as well. There was an accident that happened. After a while, it was determined that perhaps there was something involved with the victim in terms of the airbag not deploying or the ignition switch having an effect on that. And our people did take a look at it. And there's a number of other complaints too that are in the process of being investigated by Transport Canada. All of this information, of course, would be utilized by the local police officers in dealing with the matters.
One thing that we found out is that your department doesn't have the power to recall. We had to wait for General Motors to take that step and admit fault. Do you need more powers to protect Canadians?
I think that is an issue that we're struggling with right now. Of course, auto companies don't want ministers to have those kinds of powers, but certainly it is an area that we are looking at because it is incredibly important to protect the safety and security of Canadians, and I look forward to talking more on this topic in the coming weeks.
All right, Minister Raitt, we appreciate your time today.
Thanks.